Hey, everybody. I hope you're doing well today. Well, let's take a look at the possible disadvantages of foreign direct investment. Of course, we know the obvious, I think, positive or advantages of foreign direct investment, but how may the investment of a multinational corporation in a developing nation bring about some disadvantages or some bad? Okay, here we go. Okay, so here we go. Multinational corporations tend to bring their own management teams. And I'll just read these and then we'll go through them in more depth. Multinational corporations sometimes come with too much power. They do something with it's called the practice of transfer pricing. Increased pollution due to low government regulations in the developing nation. Multinational corporations extract natural resources from a host country. National corporations use capital intensive production methods. They also tend to purchase domestic firms, and multinational corporations often repatriate profits. So let's go through these sort of one at a time, okay? And I'll give you some more information. So let's take a look at the first one, okay? Multinational corporations bringing their own management teams. I think this one's pretty straightforward. What we're saying is that, if a country, if a corporation from the United States comes down to Chile, they start extracting copper, they bring their own management teams, and they're just simply taking advantage, not necessarily in the case of Chile, but inexpensive, low-skilled workers for basic production, but they're not providing any sort of training or education because the people that have the power are not from the host country. Another example, and it could be a possible disadvantage of a multinational corporation investing in a developing nation, is sometimes they just have too much power, right? Because of their size, maybe they have to gain some favor with the government in terms of tax advantages or subsidies. That overall it reduces the potential government income in developing countries, right? And along the same lines, some people will say that multinational corporations have too much power internationally, that their incomes and size allow them to exert too much influence on policy decisions taken in institutions such as the WTO. So just the sheer size of them can be a disadvantage. All right, next we come to the practice of transfer pricing, which is where multinational corporations sell goods and services from one division of the company to another division of the company it would be in a separate country, right, in order to take advantage of the different tax rates on corporate profits. So, in this way, developing countries with low tax rates designed to encourage multinational corporations to invest in their particular country reap little tax reward, and the developed nations also lose out on potential tax revenue. And so, given that approximately one-third of all international trade is made up of sales from one branch of a firm to another, this represents a potentially huge loss of revenue to governments. And of course, governments have rules to prevent firms from abusing their ability to use transfer pricing to minimize their tax payments. But as you can imagine, it's super difficult to monitor, super difficult to enforce, particularly for developing countries. All right, the fourth one is increased pollution due to low regulation. And I think this one is sort of obvious. Oftentimes, multinational corporations will move to a place where they can continue to produce at low costs or at the lowest cost possible. And therefore, they have this incentive to go to places where they can pollute at a higher rate because there's a lack of government regulations. In the same way, sometimes multinational corporations may set up in countries where labor laws are weak or non-existent even, right? Which could, of course, lead to the exploitation of local workers in terms of low wages and poor working conditions. Number five, another possible disadvantage of foreign direct investment is that, think about it, it's quite simple. You have multinational corporations from another country coming into a developing nation and extracting their precious resources. This could be metal, stones, who knows what they, copper, diamonds, you name it, gold. And there may be it could cause significant unrest in the host country as they see these profits leaving. And if you've ever tracked on Shell Oil Company and their relationship with Nigeria, there's a great example of billions and billions and billions of dollars being extracted from the Niger Delta region, and you have super wealthy expats living in these compounds next to people in abject poverty. So that can obviously cause major problems on the local level. Number six, and this one has to do with kind of an argument against what is the appropriate thing for a multinational corporation to do in a developing nation. Should they use their own resources, which tend to be really intensive? And capital intensive is a fancy way of saying like having machinery do a lot of the work, right? Or investing a lot in these very sophisticated machines that are not really appropriate for the developing nation because the skills needed in order to run these machines aren't going to be present, right? And so some people argue that in developing nations, because they have a large supply of cheap labor usually, that multinational corporations should use labor-intensive production methods, and that would be more appropriate. Number 7, multinational corporations do purchase domestic firms. And in most cases where multinational corporations buy domestic firms, the owner of the firms being bought are paid in shares of stock from the multinational corporation. And this means that it's likely that the actual money will never be used in the developing country. This is a classic thing. I live in Chile, as you all know, and there's a grocery store chain called Leader and another one called Econo. One's sort of a top range one, Leader, and the other one's sort of in more working class neighborhoods. Both of them are owned by Walmart. Both of them used to be owned by Chilean companies, and both of them undoubtedly were paid off. The owners were paid off in stock, which means they're paid off with money that's not even here in Chile. And lastly, number 8, multinational corporates may repatriate their profits, which just means they send them back to the country of origin, and therefore the money that's gained by the work that's done in a developing nation, those profits just leave the country altogether. So there you have it. Most would agree, however, you got to say that foreign direct investment is a positive factor on economic growth. And that the main concerns here, if you think about it, relate to the possible negative effects on sustainable development. Right? I mean, the effect that foreign direct investment is able to contribute to this development very much depends on the type of investment and the ability of the host country government to appropriately regulate the behavior of these multinational corporations. There always are concerns, however, that there's always a possibility of the exploitation of workers, the use of child labor, the inability of workers to form unions, and business practices that cause immediate or future environmental damage. And certainly with the growth of multinational corporations, you could argue that it could be more likely that this will happen in the future. And therefore, there are many countries, or many companies rather, multinational corporations that set up these branches of their company, or sort of, I like to think of them sort of like foundations. It's not really true, but foundations within the company. They try to promote some sort of corporate social responsibility, promoting human rights, employee rights, environmental protection, sustainable development. And if you think about it, that's good, right? I mean, we want companies to be socially responsible. If they're going to come in and extract resources or what have you, take advantage of multinational corporations to expand their global reach and to bring very big advantages to developing nations, it's nice that they're starting to develop these corporate wings. The question then becomes corporate wings of social responsibility, I should say. Then the question becomes like, how real are they? And what I'll tell you one thing: the biggest power that people have is when they hear of a country or a company exploiting people in a developing nation, is just simply to not buy their product. And that sort of negative advertising can be really catastrophic for a company, even if they're huge, even if it's a multinational corporation that has billions of dollars of assets. All right, my friends, there you go. I hope you found this video to be helpful, and we'll talk to you in a bit.